Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me on the Capitalist Cast today. Today, I am joined by Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill. Senator Hill, thanks very much for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your district, just to get things started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Leo. I'm so glad to be able to join you and the folks who watch this morning, and thank all of them for taking some time out of their day to listen to this conversation. So I'm very honored to represent the 28th Senatorial District, and that is predominantly the southern end of York County. So from just north of York City down to the Mason-Dixon line, from the Susquehanna River over to Paradise, Heidelberg, and Manheim Township. So it's a very diverse district. It has a third-class city and some of the most beautiful, productive farmland in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, it is gorgeous. I've done a little bit of traveling through the York area. I mean, some great orchards and things like that. So it's a beautiful area.
It is a great place to visit. And there's really something to do here for everyone. So if you're watching and you've never been to York County, we would love to have you visit.
Absolutely. And that's a great plug for the hometown too. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about is you are in an interesting position because you've been in both the House and the Senate. Can you talk a little bit about what the differences are, what you've seen between the two chambers in your time in service?
Well, I think the thing that strikes me the most is that when you are one of 50 as a senator, as opposed to one of 203, your ability to get things done increases exponentially. Was able to be fairly productive in the House, had 4 bills signed into law in 4 years. And, as a member of the Senate, had 5 bills signed into law in 2 years. Additionally, was able to partner with House members and other senators and had several additional bills where I had co-primed or worked with House members to get their bills over the finish line. So that in and of itself was really eye-opening to me. And I think that, you go from representing a small district of 65,000 citizens in the House, and then in the state Senate, it's over 250,000. The 28th Senate district has grown significantly from 2010 till 2018, and we have about 284,000 citizens here in this district. And it's a lot more territory to cover. It's a lot more diverse, and I realized pretty quickly that really not much changed about me or how I provided constituent casework or things that I said publicly, and all of a sudden people listened. And one week I wound up on KYW radio in Philadelphia. They never paid attention to me when I was in the House. So I think you just have more of a platform to do the good work that your constituents send you to Harrisburg to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just the size of not just the size of the district that you have, but the impact that you have, and just how much more people are interested in what you have to say. Right. And we really got a good look at that last year when you were speaking with the Secretary of Health at a hearing, and that's really kind of where the knowledge about folks kind of being sent back into COVID positive diagnoses, being sent back into nursing homes came from. Can you talk a little bit about how that occurred, and I guess also how that relates to the committee process and hearings, and why we do a lot of the things that we see you guys doing in Harrisburg?
Right. A lot of constituents say, oh my goodness, all you do is talk. All you do is have meetings and hearings. Just get something done. And I think the important part of oversight hearings is that it's an opportunity for legislators to learn things and acquire knowledge that they don't have, to help make informed decisions, and also to fix problems. And there was a joint oversight hearing the Senate Committee on Aging and Youth and the Senate Health Committee with regard to the challenges that we were facing with nursing homes and COVID. And early on, it was very evident that the majority of our cases and the highest mortality rates were amongst individuals in those types of facilities. So hold the oversight hearing, secretaries under oath, asking questions, because I had constituents who were saying to me, there are COVID positive individuals being discharged from the hospital and being put into nursing homes. And so to validate that, I simply asked the question. And sure enough, Secretary said that yes, they were doing that. And that was the first time it had been confirmed to any of us and to the public that in fact was happening. So that enables us to go forward and create solutions and work. You always want to work with the administration, but if you can't work with the administration, find other ways to make the administration move in a way to fix the problems that your constituents bring to you. So it's a really important part of the legislative process.
And beyond hearings, what do committees do to, I mean, the number of bills that are introduced is just astronomical. How does the committee structure help winnow that down?
Well, we have, I think it's 21 or 22 committees in the Senate. And I'm actually really thrilled to be back at the helm of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee. And an issue I have worked on for quite some time is closing the digital divide. And it really was an issue that was brought to me by rural constituents who were struggling to get their kids connected to do their homework. And it was an equity of access to educational resources for so many students. And, here we are, we find ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're now all of a sudden using technology to educate our kids, using technology to be able to work, using technology to receive healthcare. And all of a sudden this issue was thrown to the forefront. And fortunately, we had put a lot of the work in advance. Joint State Government Commission report, Legislative Budget and Finance Committee report. The committee held a series of hearings and identified the problems and the solutions to help advance better connectivity in the Commonwealth. So it gives us an opportunity to work through difficult issues and chart that path forward. So I'm excited to be back in that committee again, and to finish the work that we began last session and to address issues that are of great concern. Living more of our lives digitally. How do we protect our citizens' data? Cybersecurity. How do the Commonwealth procure IT? If you look at our IT procurement, it would be the fourth largest budget for a department. So only departments like education and human services are spending more than what we spend on just IT. Ransomware. Why are taxpayer dollars being used at any level of government to pay ransomware to terrorist organizations or rogue nation actors to perpetuate problems for our country? So all of those issues are things that we're going to be able to address, and it gives us the ability to work through those issues, create solutions, and work to implement solutions. And, I've been named the vice chair of the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. I've never had the opportunity to serve on that committee. I'm really excited. Agriculture is the largest industry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it's the largest industry in York County and the 28th district. So here's an opportunity to talk to the people who are there, those people who, as we had this conversation earlier, who are, signing those paychecks and creating those jobs and working through a difficult economy and create an environment here in the Commonwealth where they can grow and thrive.
Yeah. I think that it's important for folks just to recognize, it is frustrating. It's frustratingly slow to watch government move. But part of that slowness is by design, because you don't want government can act quickly, can do bad things very quickly. So in situations where speed is important, it's certainly a detriment. But in most normal circumstances, it's actually a fairly positive thing that it does take so long to get things done.
Well, and that's a really good point. You want to have checks and balances in place, and we're looking at constitutional amendments that will probably wind up on the ballot. I expect, at least two. A constitutional amendment that would limit the governor's emergency powers and limit an emergency declaration to 21 days. Currently, the governor has very broad latitude to not only declare an emergency, but extend an emergency. We've been under an emergency declaration for the opioid crisis, which I think we can all agree is significant and a great challenge for the Commonwealth. But we've been under that emergency declaration for several years now. So, in my mind, that's no longer a crisis. That is a situation where the legislature and the governor need to work to make the changes under law that we need to address the problems that this Commonwealth faces with opioids and put them permanently into our statutes. And, one of the bills that I drafted was a bill that, in working with EMS providers, particularly those in rural areas, to allow them to leave behind a dose package of naloxone so that, if they get called back again, sometimes our resources are stretched really thin. Someone can revive an individual so that they can get them the medical treatment that they need. So they can do that under an emergency declaration. Well, it's been years. Why don't we just give EMS the ability to do that? So, the governor, it was kind of ironic that he came out and he's apparently opposed to this constitutional amendment because, goodness gracious, the people may decide that he has too much power. But a constitutional amendment, again, is essentially a voter referendum. And I think it's clear that you can't have one branch of government with too much power. And the go it alone approach that we've seen throughout this pandemic has been problematic. And the legislature has been able to meet. You think back in the 70s when they passed this law, they were envisioning something like what happened at 3 Mile Island, or a major flood, or any type of natural disaster. I don't think that they expected a 10-month pandemic. So I think that, with our ability to work remotely, that this is just, it makes sense. And it restores the balance of power. It gives the people's representatives a little more say in what goes on. And, I think back to the decision that the governor made to limit travel, and he put these restrictions on individuals. Well, I represent a district right along the Mason-Dixon line, and if you live in the borough of Delta, you can walk to the grocery store in Maryland, but people were messaging me and emailing me saying, how does this work? Am I allowed to go to the grocery store over the line in Maryland? And I didn't get a response. No response. But I did have a pastor from a church right over the line in Maryland who so kindly reached out to me and said that they had gotten in touch with the governor's office. And he said that as long as people were traveling for, normal business, that, they could still go to church in Maryland and they could buy their groceries in Maryland. So I'm very appreciative to that pastor from Maryland for that response.
I think that brings up a really good point, that a lot of the emergency stuff that the governor and that the Secretary of Health had, the policies and some of the things that they had put out, they're well intentioned. It just doesn't meet with reality. The saying, well, you can't, if you go out of state, you need to quarantine or have a positive or have a negative test within 72 hours, or you need to quarantine for 14 days. It doesn't, unless you're doing that for work or you're doing it for X, Y, and Z. And by having it with all of these, kind of open-ended things, it really defeats the purpose of the initial order. And it ends up just being, who was able to get what loopholes put into the declaration. You also bring up a really good point about the constitutional amendments, which are going to, hopefully be on the ballot this year. Can you talk a little bit about there are several that are under consideration?
There are, and should probably explain the process. So in order to amend the Constitution, a bill with the same language, the exact same language, must pass the House and the Senate in 2 consecutive terms. And then it is put on the ballot in the next election for the people of the Commonwealth to approve or disapprove. So we spoke earlier about the constitutional amendment to limit the governor's emergency declaration to 21 days. If the governor believes it needs to be extended beyond 21 days, we come back to the General Assembly and ask for their consent. So it gives the people of the Commonwealth a little more input. We're also looking at the possibility of changing how our judiciary is set up, splitting the various seats on the statewide courts into regional districts to give better representation to reflect our diverse Commonwealth. And again, this would be up to the voters. And we recently saw that House State Government Committee put forward several other constitutional amendments. Now, these would not show up on the ballot soon, because this will be the first time they're through. But a lot of them are really thoughtful, good ideas about how to better manage the Commonwealth's finances and increase transparency and audits of how the government operates, which I think is, a really good thing to do. I was working this morning and straightening out some papers and came across a press release that I had written in July of 2018 upon the final passage of the budget that year. And I said, that I think my exact words were that state budget completion highlights need for further reform, and talked about a lot of the ways that we need to fix our finances, and talked about the unemployment rate, which at the time, I wasn't happy because Pennsylvania's unemployment rate was just under 5%, and the national unemployment rate was about 3.8%. And my goodness, how good those unemployment rate look now, right? So we know that we have significant financial challenges facing our Commonwealth, and that we don't have the ability to print money, and it certainly doesn't grow on trees in the northern tier or in the orchards in southern York County. So we're going to have to do a better job with that. Things like the Taxpayer Protection Act, limiting the growth of spending to the rate of inflation, all of these things. I feel like I'm back to the future. We're back in 2018, and we're going to have these difficult conversations because our finances are going to be stretched. So, and I also know that you share support for the idea of a constitutional convention here in the Commonwealth, and so many of these ideas, we're looking at the House State Government Committee putting out, I think it was like 7 or 8 different constitutional amendments. One of the ways that we could get to that type of reform would be through a constitutional convention and address all kinds of things: the size and scope of the legislature, the role of the lieutenant governor, our finances. All of those things could be addressed. And earlier, late last year, we passed a legislation for a constitutional convention to term limit members of Congress. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we're not hypocrites, right? So that, before we tell others how to do things, that we take a look at ourselves and we make those difficult decisions right here in Pennsylvania. Leading by example is always the right way to go. And we talk about having that type of integrity. I don't take a pension. I don't take the health care. I don't have a state car. I don't take mileage when I drive to and from the Capitol. Heaven knows plenty of my constituents work in the city of Harrisburg and the surrounding areas. So, if you want to lead, you always have to lead by example and limit the hypocrisy. So I think those are important things for us to tackle going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the limited constitutional convention at the state level. I think that all of the individual amendments that are being put forward, I think it's fantastic to see people recognizing, the document. Pennsylvania's Constitution was re-examined and some changes were made to it in the late 1960s, 1968, 1969. And the world that we live in today is drastically different than the world that we were in at that point in time. And I think when we look at this pandemic, we saw that there were some deficiencies, or that there are some things that certainly could be changed about the Constitution in order to rein in the governor, in order to re-equalize, to rebalance, just the power structure. And we can either take a piecemeal attempt, and don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled that the General Assembly is working on an amendment to limit the number of days an emergency declaration, and really make sure that any governor, has to come and get feedback from the General Assembly if they want to move it beyond that. There are a number of changes that need to be made structurally. And I think that rather than addressing some of those piecemeal, we have an opportunity in Pennsylvania. We have the ability, and we've used the ability in the past, to make broader changes. And I know that you were the prime sponsor of that legislation in the Senate. And I'm hoping, with all of the interest that people have in making some government reforms to the government, that we really take a closer look at a holistic approach to changing the Constitution, rather than just making minor changes to it. There are some bigger things that we can do, and we have the ability to do it in Pennsylvania in a way that safeguards the Declaration of Rights, which is Article 1 in the Constitution, and really just focuses on the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive branch. So I appreciate that, that you bring that up, and I appreciate the fact that you sponsored it last year. When we look forward, I guess we're still clearly not in a normal situation, given the continued shutdowns, given just the election, last year's election situation. What do you see beyond the constitutional amendments? I know we'll be going into the budget, but what do you see really as being and the budget may be the next big thing, but what do you see happening in the near future that people really need to be aware of?
Well, to follow up on the conversation about the Constitutional Convention, I can tell you that I think you're going to see movement to address some good government reforms soon. And, I've been working on legislation addressing how lobbyists lobby and how campaign consultants consult. But I really think that business as usual in Harrisburg has to change, and that we're starting to see the winds blow in that direction. I'm starting to hear signaling from leadership that they are interested in taking up transparency, accountability, and good government reforms. And I'm starting to feel those breezes, and I think it's a really good thing. Myself, Kristin Phillips-Hill, I strongly agree in changing the status quo. But again, to be successful, we need that magic Harrisburg equation of 26 senators, 102 House members, and one governor's signature. And I think that the challenge, of course, private sector versus public sector is, boy, the private sector snaps their fingers and they get it done quickly. But it's been several years, and I feel like there's momentum building, and I think that's a really good thing. So I think we can expect to see that. I'm hearing it both out of the House and the Senate, so that's really good. And I think that, we do have those financial challenges. We're going to see that addressed, but I do believe that we're going to see election integrity addressed. There were a lot of shortcomings. I think the law is clear, and so do my colleagues, but the courts have ruled again and again against us. And I think this was really in full view when you looked at the 45th Senate district race. The law clearly states that ballots must be signed and dated. It's a security measure. The Secretary of State released guidance that said ballots must be dated, and if not, they must be set aside. Then we saw the certification of an election with ballots that were not executed under the law. So we were told that we have to accept the results, despite the fact that it was against the law. You had 2 counties counting ballots differently. What we learned is there were 60 counties that counted ballots according to the law in the direction of the Secretary of State. 7 counties did not. So I said, it's kind of like a parent telling their teenage kid, do not speed or you're going to lose your privilege to drive. And a few weeks later, the kid receives a speeding ticket, it's busted for speeding, and the parents then go out and get the kid a new car as a reward. And you're just going, this is so not right. So we have a lot of challenges. I think the Senate and the House will work together on election reform, and the Senate has created a commission to review those issues. I certainly have some ideas of my own on improving the integrity of our elections, and this will be my 7th year on the state government committee, so we'll have the opportunity to help shepherd some of those reforms across the finish line. So I think, when you look at transparency, accountability, good government reforms, election reforms, the budget, and doing what we need to jumpstart our economy, protecting lives, making sure that people who want to be vaccinated can access a vaccination, making sure that our economy can rebound. Our plate is very full for this session.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that's really a good place for us to end the conversation. We try and keep it at about a half hour, and we're just about there. So I will definitely have you back on as we move through the legislative session. I know that the legislation that you have historically sponsored and has really been to the benefit of taxpayers, and know that you are one of the good guys in the state capitol, good gals in the state capitol. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk to us, and we'll definitely have you on again. So thank you very much, Senator Hill, and thanks everybody who tuned in today to join us. Enjoy the rest of your Martin Luther King Day.
Thanks so much, Leo. Take care.
Bye-bye.